Hello and welcome to the first episode of Opposition View as I preview Ireland's Autumn Nation Series fixtures with expert guests from the competing nations. Rejoining us on the channel today is a New Zealand journalist who was part of our World Cup coverage last year, Mr. Jamie Ward. Jamie, it's great to have you back on. It's been last time we spoke, obviously World Cup final didn't go the way you planned, but after beating England yesterday, it doesn't make up for it, but it's a better start.
Yeah, well, it's great to be back, and thank you very much for having me. And it is a very interesting time to be talking about the All Blacks right now. I mean, it's been an interesting year just so far, but I think we're moving into a test that's been hotly anticipated ever since the draw came out. Well, this 3 week block was always seen as a massive time for the All Blacks, and of course they started off with that good win. You said yesterday. For me, it was this morning. And they did it in some a way that as someone who's grown up watching the All Blacks, it felt like sort of pretty reassuring the way they did it.
No, absolutely. It was an epic encounter. We'll start with that game in Twickenham or Allianz Stadium, as I believe we're supposed to call it now. New Zealand just about getting over the line. Damien McKenzie's late conversion. The difference in the end, of course, there was the George Ford drop goal. Just for anyone who didn't see it, first of all, like yes, it's 3 wins from three for New Zealand over England this year, but not a lot to split the two teams at all.
No, not at all. I mean, I was at the other two that happened, and watching that one this morning, I've just been thinking about it all day. To be honest, it's three very, very similar games. In fact, almost identical, really, in the way that they went about. The only difference between this one this morning and the other two was that this one had a lead change right at the end and had a bit more of a crazy finish, where the other two just kind of ground out to a conclusion. I think that the main thing about this one, like I mentioned before, for the All Blacks, is that they found a way to win, which is something that they haven't been particularly great at this year. They've had real problems scoring points in the back end of games, like the last half hour of games. I think the second Bledisloe Cup test was the only test where they've actually scored tries in the last 20 minutes, which for the All Blacks is pretty crazy because that's when they go in and just sort of finish everything off and turn what should be close games into blowouts, within the blink of an eye. This obviously wasn't a blowout or anything like that, but it was a game where had England, been better, uh, they would have run out. Well, I feel like kind of reasonably comfortable victors. The main thing in the All Blacks' favour was that they played a team that has just as many issues at the back end of games as the All Blacks have, and it's not just been against them this year. These are. If I was an English fan right now, I'd be absolutely spewing at the way that game finished because of what happened on the field and the decisions that were getting made off it. I think that's probably a conversation you can have with someone who knows more about their team. But from an outsider looking in, I mean, honestly, like from an All Black point of view, the man of the match was Steve Borthwick for the changes that he made at the back end of that game. But in saying that, the All Blacks had a very All Black way of going about things, which was to adjust, find a way to win, have guys coming off the bench who made a big impact, which again is all things that they haven't been very good at this year. So I think when I say reassuring, it's what we're used to out of the All Blacks, as someone who's grown up watching them.
Yeah, no, it definitely had that vibe because New Zealand, when they kind of went behind with about 10 minutes to go, they looked like there was going to be another score. Whereas, as you said earlier on this year, there was times where it looked like they'd ran out of energy the last 20 minutes, last 30 minutes. So to kind of get that momentum back, we will talk about Razor and the team a little bit later, but one selection decision that kind of stood out was Damien McKenzie was on the bench with Bowden Barrett at 10 and Will Jordan at 15 this time. And Will Jordan, like I understand he's a great try scorer, but he's a scorer of great tries as well. That one in the first half was absolutely brilliant. How do you think that particular move went? Because Barrett went off injured. We could see McKenzie at 10 with Jordan at 15 on Friday potentially. How do you think that particular rotation went?
Yeah, great question because I'm again it's something I've been thinking about all day because it's been this massive question mark of Mackenzie all year. Well, basically not just this year, like his whole career. He's just that kind of player. He's always going to have a question mark on him because the way that he plays, um, he's got the potential to be brilliant. He's got the potential to be a disaster. And I think it's a little unfair that perception of him. Um, but at the same time, you look at what happened in, like, for example, the first Bledisloe Cup test where he just was making poor decisions, chucking unnecessary passes, things like that, and that's where that all kind of comes from. Um, the only issue though is that this isn't like a Carlos Spencer versus sort of Andrew Merton's debate because people aren't completely sold on Beauden Barrett playing 10 right now either, because he hasn't been in that position solidly for like 5, 6 years, 6 years now. So it's a long time back, and he's been playing fullback for the Blues this whole time. He hasn't been playing 10 at all. So I think that's where a little bit of the trepidation around him. So you've got these two options that people just aren't really 100% sold on. And then you've got Jordan at fullback, which for most people, that's where he plays for the Crusaders. He scores tries by the bucket load for them. So everyone's saying, oh, he has to play fullback, he has to play fullback. I actually quite liked what Ian Foster did with him when he brought him into the team by putting him on the wing. I think he scored most of his 36 tries on the wing. So there must be something working in that space. And so you've got him there as a kind of like, well, we have to see if you're actually a test standard fullback. So like none of these guys have a 100% sort of public like lock on like, okay, well, you should be there and you should be there and you should be there. It does kind of feel like Scott Robson's still kind of figuring out what to do with those guys, but I feel like Bowden's performance this morning was more in line with what the All Blacks kind of need out of a 10. And I feel like he's probably going to be back there again next weekend in Dublin.
No, could well be the case. But kind of before we move off this weekend, of course, the All Blacks XV took on Munster and Thomond Park as well. It was there. I have an article clipped down below for people who want to read it. But you mentioned before we hopped on the call, we could see some of those All Blacks 15 players feature over the next couple of weeks. What did you make of their kind of performance from what you've seen of it?
I was pretty impressed with the way that All Blacks 15 team played. It's kind of a weird one for us because this team it doesn't really serve any purpose for the fans in New Zealand. It's simply like essentially a development team. It's where you bring these young guys in who are potentially going to be All Blacks in like 2 years' time, so they can get a taste of as close to Test rugby as you possibly can. Going overseas, uh, they don't schedule the games in any way that we back at home. It's not friendly for us. Like this game happened directly after the English test. So I think they might have even overlapped. And then a couple of years ago, when we were away on tour, they played them at the same time as the All Blacks. So nothing about this team is being done with the New Zealand public in mind. However, it's working. Like the purpose of it is working. Firstly, because you've got these good players coming through. You've got Harry Plummer, who you would have seen today, who admittedly has already played a test, albeit 2 minutes of it. But he's out there, you know, sharpening his tools for a potential call up, like because he's the other guy in that conversation we just had before. I don't think he's going to get caught up unless there's some sort of injury. But he had a great game this morning. You've got the next breed of like locks, which was like a real issue for the All Blacks at the start of the year, which has that situation has become better. And you saw the likes of Natoi Akoi and Fabian Holland, who have that tag of All Blacks in waiting put on them. Um, so I think that all the guys that were probably sort of on the fringe, would have been told, hey, just so you know, if this guy falls over in the All Blacks or this happens, you're going to get called up next week for one of these tests because the attrition rate of these 3 weeks is going to be really high. and I think all the guys in that picture put their hands up this morning. And just on that, like watching it on TV, it looked like a fantastic atmosphere. So the other role of that team, which is to sell tickets and promote the All Black brand, is clearly being fulfilled as well.
Absolutely. And I was in the press conference afterwards. Clayton McMillan, the New Zealand 15 head coach, he was saying the exact same thing. He thought it was an unbelievable experience. He could not thank the locals enough for the atmosphere on the day and for the week as a whole. And as you said, it does kind of sell that brand while also fulfilling the purpose of, guys who are very close. You take someone like Quinty Paya or Sean Stevenson or even Harry Plummer, they'd probably have more caps for other nations, but that's the depth that New Zealand have in those positions. And we might just kind of segue on to 2024 as a whole for New Zealand because summer tests, they were decent, Rugby Championship maybe not so much. As you mentioned, for anyone who did see the England game, the summer games were kind of similar in vibe. What do you think Razor would have taken away from those? His first couple of games as New Zealand coach, getting those wins over England under his belt.
The overwhelming feeling from those was they were just happy to win because there was this massive weight of expectation on him coming in that things were going to change and that the All Blacks were going to get back to being great again after 4 very difficult years for the All Blacks. That ironically culminated within one missed kick of being world champions. But yeah, like I said, the expectation was massive, and so all he wanted to do was win those games. It wouldn't have mattered if they'd won them 3-0, like both of them. They just needed to get off to a good start, which they did. And it took until about the sort of third game, the one against Fiji, where people started to realize, like, hang on a minute, this team isn't actually any different to the one last year. The only differences have been the enforced changes that he's had to make. Like you have to replace Mwanga, you have to replace Retallick, and you have to replace Aaron Smith, and then guys who are injured. And you would have had to have thought had all those guys stuck around, he probably would have picked them. So he just was taking Ian Foster's team and carrying on with it. I think what they got right in those early tests was they just stuck to the basics. The scrum has been very good. They got a bit of a tickle up this morning by that starting English pack, but came right by the end of the game. But that's been the easily the biggest strength of the All Blacks this season. And then it sort of the narrative went into like, well, you're not scoring that many points in games. They put it was like 16-15 the first test against England, 24-17, and they weren't closing those games out. So that's been the work on all year. And as we've gone on, that issue of not finishing games off has persisted with them. It sort of got answered this morning, and I think that's why you can take this morning's game and say, well, it definitely wasn't the most satisfying performance by the All Blacks, but it was probably the most satisfying result because it's hopefully meant that they've turned a corner on that, the corner that we've been hoping they have. Because even when they've been winning, we've still been going, like, yeah, hang on, like there's still these problems at the end of the game. So I think that the other thing the other main thing that's came out of those early tests is that he was forced to pick some new guys, and you really can't argue with the players that he's picked. Wallace Satiti was, an actually pretty controversial selection because of the form of Hoskins Satutu in Super Rugby Pacific, and that was the major. Like how could you possibly leave that guy out? He scored 12 tries in the competition, was like the MVP, and the Blues won the title a lot off his hard work. Instead, he went with Wallace City, who again was outstanding. Like no one's got a problem with him being in the team. And it turns out Wallace City's on his way to potentially being World Rugby bloody breakthrough player of the year. Cortez Ratuma wasn't probably at his best this morning, but it hasn't really looked out of place as a test halfback. Sam Darry at lock, he came in and had to do a job, and one guy that I've got a lot of time for, Pasaleo Tossi, who really came out of nowhere because he had only started, I think, half a dozen games for the Hurricanes over sort of 4 years. Was got real out of the blue selection, and he's been fantastic. And pairing up with Tamati Williams, all of a sudden the All Blacks have the one of the biggest probably the biggest propping rotation in world rugby right now. So that's what was taken out of those early tests. Like he had to bring new players in. He did it very slowly, like incrementally. It was probably a good thing for Wallace Titi to sort of wait until he got to South Africa to really have to be put under the blowtorch there. But he's responded really well, and like I said, he had a fucking huge game this morning. So he's he's really going places, and that's because of the selection policy that Scott Robertson has had.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was one of the players I would have mentioned when we talk about the squad a little bit later on, but we can brush over that particular point. But kind of moving on to the rugby championship, then it was a mixed bag. I think that's the fairest way of putting it for New Zealand. From your perspective, what was the expectations like going in compared to how you came out of it? Because obviously up here, all the talk was New Zealand, South Africa, and Australia and Argentina barely got a mention. But for New Zealand, what was the kind of overriding thoughts after?
The expectation for the rugby championship is to win it every year. It doesn't matter. It was the hardest possible way to do it because of having to play Springboks in the sort of place they're in right now at home. Like they're not world champions by accident. They're playing at home. It's the toughest test that the All Blacks face, and they had to do it twice in order to win the rugby championship. And then, of course, everything got derailed in that first game against Argentina, which was a massive shock because no one saw that coming. There, like even though the All Blacks' record in Wellington hadn't been great up until that point, like no one was expecting that to happen. I think that probably says a lot about the lack of knowledge that we had around this Argentina team because the further away we've got from that test, the more I've personally thought, well, it's actually becoming more understandable, not acceptable because the All Blacks shouldn't lose any tests at home, but it's understandable because the Pumas are clearly in a really golden period of their history. They've got a great team, they've got a great coach, and they went and knocked off the Springboks like not long after that. So I'm looking at it going like, okay, I can kind of see how that happened, and then off to South Africa. I mean, they did respond the next week. The All Blacks did in sort of typical All Black fashion, where they just wiped them out in the first like 15 minutes of the game, and then went off to South Africa. And yeah, I think again, the further away we get from these results, and you realise that this isn't just a Springbok team that just showed up for the World Cup. Like we all kind of perceive South African rugby to be that they only care about the World Cup and they don't care about anything. They've clearly built a system where they're going to dominate or try and dominate world rugby for the years in between as well because of the amount of depth that they've got and the amount of combinations they can put out. So to go to South Africa and to you know just what was it 4 points in Johannesburg and 6 points in Cape Town. I was at both of those tests as well. Like I experienced the atmosphere. One thing that I don't think people have talked about enough because this actually happened to me was that they don't play in Super Rugby in South Africa anymore. So quite a lot of those New Zealand players haven't even been to South Africa, let alone played at Ellis Park. And I can tell you, altitude sickness is a thing. It's I was finding it really difficult just to walk up and down the stairs at some points during the week. We were getting nosebleeds. It just dries your skin out. It just makes you feel very, very uncomfortable. And I think that probably played a bit of a part in what happened in that first test because for a while there, it really looked like the All Blacks were cruising to win that one. The second test was a bit more of an arm wrestle, obviously. All Blacks didn't score a try. It was the first time they hadn't scored a try in like 6 years in a test match. So I think that walking away from that, and I know Ireland went down there earlier in the season and did take a test off them, but had to do it in the most dramatic circumstances possible. Like that's what it takes to beat the Springboks at home. right now. So I don't think there's any shame in that. Again, it's not like acceptable for the All Blacks to lose Test, but losing to South Africa is the one where that you're going to get probably the most positive reaction out of All Black fans. And then on to the Bledisloe Cup. Well, again, like those two games, I mean, they kind of said more about the Wallabies than they did about the All Blacks. The All Blacks just had the same sort of issues that they'd had, yeah, especially in that first test, because it looked like they were going to win by about 60 and then couldn't score any points in the second half. Had that game got in Sydney gone about 5 minutes longer, the Wallabies probably would have won. It just goes to show that their issues, the Wallabies' issues, is that um, they take way too long to get into games. And the All Blacks decide to exit them far too early. So it was like kind of a perfect storm. And then the second test, the All Blacks finally kind of got it right. They again, they should have won by more, but that whole match was kind of more about the pageantry of Sam Cane's 100th test and TJ Perenara's last ever home test. So they didn't win. It got quickly pointed out that Ian Foster had never actually lost the rugby championship. But then again, he never had to do it in the way that this team had to. But it was a little bit like, okay, is this what it's going to be like from now on? When those results sort of came through.
Absolutely. And that kind of leaves us in this position now, kind of we'll remove last night's game against England from the equation, but where New Zealand seemed to be picking up a small bit of momentum. As you said, the Argentina loss was probably the most unexpected, but some positives to be taken across the board. And for Scott Robertson, there was some little bit of pressure. There was some talk. Obviously, what he did at Super Rugby was unbelievable. Coming into this weekend and this autumn test, where do you think the perception of Scott Robertson is at the moment and his coaching staff?
It's changed. I can tell you that much. It's become, as someone who's obviously works close to the team, and we talk about this a lot, is that he's clearly a guy who's learning on the job, and he's almost kind of too honest to a fault in terms of like how he doesn't have a slick answer for anything like questions of we don't know, because one thing that we sort of made pretty clear to NZ Rugby going into this was like we've just had 4 years of really combative relationship with the All Blacks. This guy's coming in where he's never had to really face any hard questions, never had to face any scrutiny over what he's done because he's won everything. And unless the All Blacks win everything from the word go, which looking at their schedule, they're probably not going to do, he's going to find himself in some situation he's never been in before. And you definitely get that impression from him that he's got the team in a rebuild. But of course, it being the All Blacks, he can never admit that it's a rebuild. You can't say that to the New Zealand public. You can't say, because what you're saying is we need you to accept that we're going to lose some games. That's not going to happen. So what he kind of has to do is uh, let people come to that conclusion themselves and be okay with it themselves. And it's a kind of an interesting situation because people are kind of coming around to it in a way that only like New Zealand or like All Black fans kind of can, where it's like, well, I don't like it. I don't like what's going on here. But if it's for the greater good of everything, then I guess, if we win the next World Cup or if we're going on the South African tour in a couple of years, then I guess we can live with it more than anything else.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because, as you said, he did win it all with Super Rugby. It was almost, playing the competition on easy mode at times for that Crusaders team, but this is a massive step up. And just kind of on that for a second, like obviously Super Rugby, kind of when I was growing up, when I started watching maybe 2013, 14, 15, it was flying. Seems to have taken a step back now. With the South African teams gone, with the likes of the Drua now in there, where do you think Super Rugby Pacific is at as a competition?
The age-old question. Um, right now, I think that the focus on it is to be a more viable product just from a marketing point of view. Like all the talk about it is not really about rugby because I think this year the rugby was actually pretty good. Like there's a clear bit of um, a gap between the haves and the have-nots, but the Crusaders completely bombing out, like completely changed the whole perception of the competition because you had a team that just won 7 titles in a row. So I think the problem that a lot of people had with it was, well, why should I bother watching this? Because I know who's going to win. That all went out the window this year. The biggest market team in New Zealand, who hadn't won a title for like 21 years, uh, goes through the competition. The Hurricanes have a great season when there was absolutely no expectations on them because they had a new coach. They'd lost a bunch of players, so they were looking like they were going to be in a rebuild mode, and they end up finishing top of the table. So I think from and then of course you had no expectations on the Australian teams. It turns out the Reds are like one of the best teams in the world to watch, like anywhere. Like they just play really good rugby uh, as well. The Brumbies are always good. People forget that when they talk about Super Rugby. The Brumbies, I think, have made the semi-finals all like almost every year that they've been in it. So from a rugby point of view, it's like, yeah, I get it if you're sitting over on the other side of the world and you don't have any sort of really strong emotional connection to these teams, like why it might be less interesting. And I completely get that. Like we feel the same way about European rugby as well. But I think what and you said and you kind of answered it yourself because you said, well, when I started watching it was great because it was the best rugby that you could probably watch. You probably don't feel that way. I think that's fair to say. And I think the job that Super Rugby has to have is to get it back to that perception. I mean, another reason why, and it's just more of a banal kind of thing, is because you probably got to watch a lot of the games at good time zones for you because you're in the same time zone as South Africa. So you got to see all those games. We never got to see those games because they're in the middle of the night for us. So I think that from the Northern Hemisphere point of view, it's kind of more out of sight, out of mind. But from a rugby point of view, the product's it's still pretty good. It's probably not as good as it was, but the other thing about it is what its main purpose is to produce All Blacks, and you can't argue with the amount of guys that have come through because we mentioned it before. Boss Teddy just came off a huge Super Rugby campaign, and he wouldn't have got there had it not been for that competition. So it's still doing its job in that respect.
Absolutely. And from one kind of age-old question to the newfound rivalry, Ireland New Zealand's on Friday in Lansdowne Road, 10 past 8 kickoff time for those here. We'll start with the preview. Ireland come into this as Six Nations champions, could have been Grand Slam. They got 1 win in South Africa, could have been two. New Zealand, they'll have their own question marks. Just from your point of view, it feels like one of the games of the autumn. How are you feeling coming into this?
I'm feeling a bit like it's going to be a bit different because this is a question I want to ask you. Why are they playing it on Friday night? What's
I can only
happening?
assume TV. It's I can only assume. Hopefully not
What's
though, because
happening on
it's
Saturday?
nothing.
Right.
England, Australia, I think potentially. I don't know.
Okay,
It's
all right. Fair enough. I don't. Personally, I don't have an issue with it. I quite like these. I think they played a test. Oh, the San Diego test they played on a Friday night in the USA. So Saturday it was good. We got everything done by Saturday. We could go and have a beer on Saturday night. So I'm not upset about it at all. It's also on a really good time for us. It's 9 o'clock in the morning here, so we don't have to get up. So the game this morning was 4. So I've been up since 4. So not complaining at all. Um, but how? So the question was, sorry, how are we feeling
yeah.
about this one?
Well, yourself in particular.
Yeah, I think that again, this 3 weeks was going to be seen as a massive test. Obviously, there's now not only this burgeoning rivalry that exists between the two teams. It feels like there's a bit of bad blood as well, which is good. It's a rivalry. This is what rivalries are built on. And if you look back at the last time they played, it was one of the most epic Test matches, World Cup matches you'll ever see. Obviously, Irish fans are going to be wanting to reverse that result, and I think the All Blacks definitely see this test as one of the main ones. They've ringed it in the calendar. Like there's they know they're not taking this. Not that they took them lightly before, but they're definitely among the perception of New Zealand's. Like it hurt a lot when Ireland came down here and beat the All Blacks at home. Like that should not be happening at all. So it feels like there's all these kind of elements of revenge going both ways. So I think there's going to be a bit of feeling in this one. We've already seen it on social media, thanks to Rico Ioane and Johnny Sexton. But I think that once the game starts, the one advantage that the All Blacks are going to have is that this is Ireland's first game of the season. I don't know how much of a difference that's going to make, like in terms of actual, like it's not going to make they're not going to be a worse team, but because the All Blacks are coming in sort of battle hardened, they've had this match practice, this match experience going into it. Just from a psychological point of view, I think they'll be feeling pretty good, especially because of the way that they picked up this result against England. So yeah, I mean, I don't need to hype it up. It's huge. Like I really wish I was going to be there for it.
No, it's an absolutely massive game, and it is a great way to kind of to start off Ireland's autumn because it is the game. Like for me, and people might say it's a very critical eye, but I think if Ireland don't win this, you may look back on 2024 as being a disappointment because they were, you know, they really should have won in Twickenham. I don't know if you've seen that game in the Six Nations, but they really should have won that game. Like they were poor in Loftus first felt for large parts. Yes, altitude is a factor, but obviously our players are playing URC. They should be down there. They should be coming familiar to it at this stage. So I feel like if you come out of this weekend and if Ireland lose, you'll have kind of lost two of your four biggest games of the year. And ultimately, if Ireland are world number one, or world number two, world number three, you want to be doing a little bit better than that. But that frames it because there's the quarter final, there's the 2022 test, there's all of this to kind of look at it from. For New Zealand fans, like as you said, it would have stung when Ireland went down there, but they did get some revenge. What is the perception of Ireland, do you think, in terms of the rugby? Maybe not the social media barbs as we mentioned, but in terms of the rugby, because look, it's the most successful Ireland team ever, most successful Irish era, and they finally made a rivalry out of it. So is there a bit of respect there?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Like I don't think, um, yeah, a lot of crap gets said online and everything, but I don't think you'll find any All Black fans who would suggest that Ireland are the you know anything less than a massive threat towards the All Blacks, especially playing at home as well. Because the last time they played in Dublin, like Ireland won pretty convincingly. It was 29-20, if I remember correctly, but it should have been a lot more than that. And also, right now, alongside France, they're seen as Ireland are seen as the leading nations in Europe. And it's a real benchmark for the All Blacks to be able to go up there and knock that team off. I mean, obviously, whenever All Black teams go on tours, you look at who won the Six Nations. Like that's the big game. Who are Grand Slam champions, and so the tours are organised around that. Like that's the main test. So I feel like that this one and France, because of course bit of a point to prove against those guys as well. I've seen as the big ones on this tour, and yeah, I think that ever since that 2016 game, and then 2018, it's taken probably until Ireland came down here and won for a lot of New Zealand fans to be like, okay, they're not just going through a really sort of good patch. They're kind of here to stay. And every time we play these guys, it's going to be hard. It's not going to be like the old days where they'd come down and we'd whip them by 30, 40, or whatever, and use those tests as ways of, debuting guys. It's not like that anymore. It's not really like that for anybody anymore because things are just so even. And I think that's the main narrative of just Test rugby and All Black fans kind of needing to understand that it's just not like the way it was in the old days.
No, that's absolutely the case, and it is so narrow. Even look at the Six Nations and how, like Wales, who were very close to a World Cup semi final, were the poorest team in the Six Nations the last 2 years. England had a similar role. They possibly should have got to a final, but to kind of wrap the conversation up, like we've had the pleasantries, we've been all nice, but how do you see the game on Friday going?
I can only talk about from the All Blacks point of view because this is like I said, this is Ireland's first game of the season. I did watch the matches in South Africa. It's kind of hard. I felt it to be a bit of a hard watch because of the styles clash that happened. It didn't make for great viewing, if you know what I mean. Like if you're a real rugby nerd, and you're really sort of counting how many phases and all that sort of thing. It was it probably would have been heaven, but it was kind of hard to get into. I mean, I was watching it more to just sort of get a read on the Springboks more than anything else. I didn't really learn an awful lot. All I know is that the majority of that Irish team from last year is back, and there are guys who are in who are coming off last season's like great form. Again, like I said, that was last season for you guys. This is another weekend for the All Blacks. I think that from an All Black point of view, if they can take all the good bits that they've put together over the Rugby Championship and then into this game against England, and they can put them all together, I'd be pretty confident of them winning because it's all there for them. I feel like there's going to be quite a bit of pressure on Ireland too, because I think there's going to be a bit of expectation on them now that their fans, you guys, expect them to beat the All Blacks, which is like a massive. You can't. I don't think anyone should expect to beat the All Blacks, but I think if any fan base probably is right now, it's Ireland because you've done it before and kind of right and like kind of fair enough as well. So I think from an All Black point of view, if they can, there's stuff they've been very very good at this year. The set piece, sorry, the scrum's been great. The lineout's been shaky. The inside backs new halfback combinations is going pretty well. The winger, Caleb Clark, Will Jordan, both playing really well. So I think if everything can fit together, I can see the All Blacks winning this game. Yeah,
And if you were to stick your head in the line, is it going to be New Zealand? Is it going to be Ireland?
I'm going to say the All Blacks. Yeah.
That's absolutely fair. I'll just wait until the team sheet. So if anything major happens during the week, I won't look too bad. But Jamie, we'll leave it at that. My thanks very much for coming on. I know it's been a long day, but I suppose a long day with rugby is the only caveat, I suppose. And thanks home to everyone for listening. We've unrivaled coverage of all four of Ireland's tests coming across the month. So please do stay tuned and subscribe. You can find the links to all my channels below, as well as my articles on Munster All Blacks for anyone who missed it, my November campaign, etc. But for now and until next time, take it easy.